Beautiful. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. Hello. And thank you for being here this evening for NSSR's third 3-Minute Thesis Challenge.
Yeah!
Thank you. I want to give a very special shout out to a few folks who are here who are not yet our students, but are prospective admitted students. Are any of those folks here today? No, not here, didn't come out in the rain? Okay, thank you. Well, thank you to the students, the faculty, the staff who are here, and particularly our presenters. My name is Francesca Ferrono. I'm the Assistant Director of Academic Affairs here at the New School for Social Research. And unfortunately for you all, I'll also be your host. All right, so Alex, I'm going to need you to come to the podium at your earliest convenience. Now would be great. I want to introduce to you Alex Alenikoff, the Dean of NSSR.
Thanks for warming up the crowd. That was great. Anyway, it's great to see a full room tonight. In the spirit of the evening, I've been told to limit my remarks to less than 3 minutes, so I will do that. What can you do in 3 minutes? You can walk 3 city blocks. You can probably cook a runny egg. You could brush your teeth. You could send how many texts? 25 texts in 3 minutes, something like that. But one thing I know you cannot do is you cannot summarize months and months of reading and thinking and writing in 3 minutes. That cannot be done, right? Can't be done. But it can be done, because it's going to be done here tonight. And what I'm thinking about is, I'm thinking about diamonds. Because diamonds are made from coal, and all it takes is extreme heat and 800,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. And you've got a diamond. And we have 9 presenters with us tonight here who've applied that kind of intellectual heat and that kind of scholarly pressure to their raw materials. And the result will be, I am utterly confident, 9 3-minute diamonds. Now, you guys listening tonight, you're in for a treat. We're going to be quiet while people present, but once they're done, you can go crazy. That's our tradition here. No problem being raucous and wild. And if I'm reading the room right, it might be kind of a raucous night tonight. I want to add a few words of thanks to the organizers of the event, Jennifer McDonald, Francesca you just met, Ryan Gustafson, and Sherry Cohn. And I particularly want to thank our 3 judges sitting in front here, Krisa Pugh, Emma Park, and Starlet Hartley, and they have been selected for their ability to judge gems. So let the games begin.
Thank you so much, Alex. Before we begin, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the 3-Minute Thesis Challenge is, including the format and the rules. 3-Minute Thesis, also affectionately referred to as 3MT. I know there are a lot of acronyms we throw around the university, so this one I hope sticks with you. 3MT is a research communication competition that was developed at the University of Queensland in Australia. Graduate students have 3 minutes to present their research and its relevance to a non-specialist audience. We've had a little bit of a preview today from Alex. Our 3 esteemed judges are Professor Krisa Pugh. Professor, give us a little wave. Krisa Pugh is Assistant Professor of Sociology at NSSR and Eugene Lang. Her research examines the social and political legacies of imperialism, cultural heritage, and museums, and violence in post-colonial Africa and Southeast Asia. Her current book project is entitled Guardians of Beautiful Things, The Politics of Post-Colonial Cultural Heritage, Theft, Refusal, and Repair. Thank you, Krisa. Woo. Next up, we've got Emma Park, who is an assistant professor of historical studies here at NSSR. She's the author of Infrastructural Attachments, Austerity, Sovereignty, and expertise in Kenya, which is forthcoming in 2024, and is writing with Kevin Donovan a book entitled Parastatal, Intimacy, Value, and Rent in Digital Kenya. Thank you, Emma. And our final judge of the night is Starlet Hartley, who's a fourth-year PhD student in our Cognitive, Social, and Developmental Psychology program. She studies morals, values, and how one's social identity may influence moral norms, guiding cooperation and conflict with others. In last year's 3-Minute Thesis competition, she placed second with her work on how sacred value conflict influences meta-perceptions and fuels a vicious cycle of conflict. Thank you, Scarlett. Okay, so here are the rules. Down to business. Each of our 9 finalists will have a single static PowerPoint slide. Nothing else. No electronic media, no props, no gimmicks. It's just a 3-minute oral presentation of their work. They can't go beyond 3 minutes or else they'll be disqualified. Okay, so presentations will start right after their mic check. It's a note particularly for you all in the back. And the judges' decisions are final. Okay, here's a little bit about the judging criteria. The first area is comprehension and content. Students are tasked with providing an understanding of background, significance, and impact of their research while avoiding jargon. Was there a clear logic to their presentation this evening? Was adequate time spent on each aspect? You'll be the judge. Contestants will also be judged on engagement and communication. Did they pique your interest? Did they avoid overgeneralizing? Were they enthusiastic? Did they have a stage presence? Did they make good use of their single static PowerPoint slide? Here's where it gets really exciting. In terms of prizes, we have 4 separate prizes and 4 separate winners. So there's a first place prize for our master's student of $1,000. We have another first place prize for our PhD student of, you guessed it, $1,000. Our second place prize is irrespective of degree, and that is for $750. All right, and this is where you come in. You have agency here. You all will vote to pick your favorite. Only one name. I don't want any rankings from you all. You should have, I'm not quite Oprah. I've only got a piece of paper beneath your seat. We will circulate pens later, but with that piece of paper holds great responsibility. I would like you to write the name of your top competitor, and we'll collect them at the end. But we'll wait till the end for all of that. Okay, with that said, I'd like everyone to remain quiet during presentations, and that you wait until the end of the presentations, both master's and PhD, to help yourself to food. Without further ado, it's time for our master's students. Okay, our first presenter today is Daniela Avendano from Psychology. Originally from Miami, Daniela's background includes working in educational institutions and childcare development. Being first generation born in the U.S. with a Venezuelan family, Daniela has deep interest in social issues within the Latin American community and early intervention psychology. Daniela's presentation is entitled Navigating Nuestra Gente, Exploring the Latinx, Latine, and Latina-Latino divide.
I'm a first-generation Venezuelan American, and language is essentially a very, very important part of my culture and my identity. First of all, language is essentially so important when it comes to the Spanish language because we both have masculine and feminine terms. We have words like sol, which means moon, and we have luna, which means moon. And it's just so important how identity and belonging and civic engagement interacts with all of this. It's so interesting, too, how we have this social identity component to it and how it affects our self-esteem. I am so incredibly thrilled to talk about my research today because I think it impacts a lot of us Latinos who have, come from, this minority group who's growing and growing and growing so much every day. And it's the fastest growing minority in America, basically. And so I have this study where I explored civic engagement, and I had this study that I wanted to do where I saw the sociolinguistic terms of Latina, Latino, Latinx, and Latine. And I wanted to see how connected or disconnected people felt with these terms. And when I say civic engagement, I mean charity events, I mean social connection, and we found great studies. We found that over 30% loved the term Latina, Latina, and felt super connected to the term. We also explored alienation, and we explored social identity, and we saw that people felt very, very, very alienated with the term Latinx, and they felt very, very connected to the term Latino and Latina. And so part of this involvement is just to see how the desire to be part of a group, a social group, like the Latin American group, is very important for language, and how these masculine and feminine words are part of the language itself. And we want to be inclusive with everybody, and we want to be as inclusive as possible, but we also have to understand how language is so important to the Latin American community, and how a lot of us, our first language was Spanish, and it just doesn't flow. Latinx in Spanish would be Latinx. It just does not flow, and our tonality is all about, feeling the vibe and feeling how we feel. And so, yeah, that's basically Nuestra Gente, and I feel very, very proud of my work, and I hope to continue my work throughout, the U.S. and maybe outside of the U.S. as well. Thank you so much.
Our second presenter is Minsu from Anthropology. Her research interests center upon the innovation paradigm within psychopharmaceutical industries and institutional geographies of healthcare practices. Her most recent project explored the ambiguity between a supposedly impartial scientific community and profit-driven pharmaceutical companies in the context of Western psychedelia. Our talk today is entitled Unveiling the Underground Tapestry, Post-Colonial Taiwanese Psychopharmacology and the Influence of Native Gangs.
Escalating mental health issues worldwide, the promising therapeutic benefits of psychedelics such as MDMA, LSD, and ketamine are emerging as potential medical breakthroughs. This development has fueled heated competition in the global mental health care market and driven growth also in East Asia's pharmaceutical and biotech industries, with Taiwan making significant strides in drug research. Existing literature have highlighted the aesthetic and cultural aspects of psychedelic experiences, focusing on their depiction in media and connections to East Asian religions such as Taoism and Buddhism. However, it's crucial to acknowledge the complexities of these aesthetics, which elude simple narratives. Here, I will briefly introduce the historical uses and representations of psychoactive drugs in Taiwan, emphasizing the influential roles of local gangs, heitao. The term heitao, in the strict sense of the word, refers to an invisible passage, facilitating underground trade and revealing political forms of life. Its historiography illustrates the infusion of modernity by colonial power dynamics, particularly through the distribution of drugs. Heidao has also connected practical life with spiritual practices within folk religions, in which the approach to religion mirrors to pragmatic views towards the complex and secular nature of psychedelic experiences. Psychoactive drugs entered Taiwan in the mid-19th century through the colonial opium trade, where local gangs, once martial artists, thrived and later adapted to political changes and the introduction of newly synthesized drugs manufactured by pharmacologists of the Japanese Empire. Gangs played a significant role in merging traditional societies with modern technology, impacting both the global drug trade and local practices, including religious, cultural, and recreational uses. After the end of Japanese rule, and particularly following the democratization of the 1990s, smaller and decentralized gangs, largely comprising youth, expanded their focus to include political and social advocacy. The intersection of discourses in biomedicine and local cultural practices in psychedelic substances places Taiwan at a crucial point of scientific and cultural synthesis. The critical role played by local gangs, particularly in the diffusion and cultural integration of psychedelics, reveals the importance of understanding the local context of drug economy and drug cultures. This exploration is vital not only for deepening the understanding of drugs and medicine, but also for opening new avenues to address the politics surrounding the production and distribution of knowledge. Thank you.
Is that anything?
Yep.
Yeah? Don't start the clock.
Wait, let me introduce you first. Get yourself situated with the mic, and I'll introduce you.
I'll just hold it like this. I practiced the whole time holding a grape. So.
All right. Well, next up we have got Patrick Cleary, who's a second-year master's student in global political economy and finance. Patrick's research focuses on the relationships between finance and climate change. Outside of class, he's the founder of the Climate Economics Research Association and co-captain of the New School Soccer Club. His presentation today is entitled, "Is Climate Risk Priced In? A Case Study of Collier County, Florida."
Tonight, I'm going to talk to you about something tremendously exciting. Insurance. In 2020, my parents moved to Marco Island in Collier County, Florida. At the time, I asked my dad if he was worried that climate change might lower the value of his new condo. He said no. In my research, I wanted to investigate whether he should be worried, whether climate change was having an impact on the real estate market in my parents' community. In finance terms, what I'm investigating is whether climate risk is priced into the market, whether people are considering the risk of climate change when they decide whether or not to buy a home and how much to pay for it. One way that markets price in climate risk is through insurance. Insurance companies stay in business by charging a little more to people who are at higher risk of making a claim, like someone with a bunch of speeding tickets or a family history of heart problems. The same principle applies to flood insurance. The riskier the home being insured for flooding, the higher the payment on it. And just like how all drivers are legally required to carry car insurance, anyone who owns a home in a high-risk flood area is legally required to buy flood insurance for it. This makes flood insurance pricing a pretty good yardstick of climate risk in coastal areas. Now here's a fun fact. The largest flood insurer in the US isn't Geico or Allstate, it's actually the federal government. In the 1970s, FEMA created the National Flood Insurance Program to offset the cost of rebuilding after natural disasters. And in the late 2010s, they were updating their models and realized they drastically underestimated the likelihood of catastrophic flooding in certain areas. So they had to update their pricing, but Congress only lets them raise rates by 50% per year. It may take as many as 10 years for some houses to have flood insurance rates which accurately reflect their risk of flooding. I created these two maps using public FEMA data and files I got from the Collier County tax assessor. This map shows how much rates are going to go up once flood risk is fully and accurately priced in. So instead of thinking of it as a map of insurance, think of it as a map of climate risk. This map shows home prices. So if you think of the darkest red areas as the riskiest ones, you see that they're also the most expensive ones. So in my regression analysis, I compared two homes that are the same in every respect. Same size, same amenities, same distance to the beach. But home A is going to have its flood insurance increase by 100% more than home B. I found that home A sells for 4% less than home B. So is climate risk priced into the market? Yes, but only a little bit. A home is the most valuable asset that most people own. The value of a bunch of homes going down at the same time isn't just a bummer for the homeowners, it's a problem for all of us. It can cause financial crises, economic collapse. That's why insurance is so interesting and so important, because it takes the future risk of climate change and brings it forward into the present. I argue that insurance acts as a canary in the coal mine of the climate crisis. Thank you.
There's a relay.
Our next presenter is Thomas Koenigs of the Philosophy Department and the Gender and Sexuality Institute. They're interested in the intersection between higher education in New York City and colonialism, memory, and archive. With the help of Dion Brand's Map to the Door of No Return, Thomas's most recent project involves tracing the new school's institutional involvement with the financiers and the descendants of financiers of the transatlantic slave trade, to memorialize instead the names and histories of the formerly enslaved, independent of their masters, Charles Pine, Margaret Pine, Caesar, and Elsie. Their talk is entitled Red Roots, Teaching and Learning Colonial History at the New School.
Hello. Well, my presentation, first off, is in memory of Margaret Pine, whose life lives on far beyond the Greenwood Cemetery in which she is interred. One day, a student asked me on a 3x5 note card, "Why has our lecture yet to address slavery? Sincerely, what is gained by ignoring this?" A teacher's assistant, I went to the door of my professor's room, one I'd known well. As a student, I'd taken nearly every class she had to offer. Upon entering, I was blinded by the familiar sunlight streaming through her window and transported to another passageway she had opened up to me. The breezy and bright doors, the doorway to our new school president's townhouse on West 11th Street. There she lived with her partner, David Van Zandt. In the garden, in the back garden, upon her insistence to hold class during the 2018 cafeteria strike, there we dedicated students sat, drinking tea and eating crumpets in the backyard. I'm sorry. Oh God, well, Christ, this is such important information. I fear I'm just gonna read. I've got to. Perhaps it was the sun disappearing behind the clouds, but back in her office, I was overcome with a sudden chill, thinking about my students' questions, or rather, what I might find looking for their answers. I tried burying them, tilling in a broad field of my colonial research. Professor Hustis responded as if having unearthed the word. She said, "David came from a long line of colonists and whose daughters danced with George Washington at their inauguration." To some extent, the answer to my students' question, slavery, what is gained by ignoring this, exists in the empty space between my professor's words and the gaps of our institution's memory, in the silences we allow ourselves. The Van Zandts, after all, were not farmers. They were enslavers, they were insurers, they were traders. And indeed, before Catherine Van Zandt danced her minuet with George Washington, Her father brewed cocoa and coffee, sweetening the smells and the sights of young black people being sold at their family's wharf. As I try to finish my remarks in the time allowed, you may be wanting a more comfortable place to stop and arrive at an end, a solstice, and I haven't found it yet. As Dion Brand reminds us, there are no seasons, there is no handle for which to grab, no spring passages back to where the tulips grow. This is the door with no return, but we arrive together where we have the power to sit in the room with history, with Margaret Pine, Charles Pine, Caesar, and Elsie. Thank you.
Our next MA presenter is João Eduardo Peçanha de Freitas of Liberal Studies. João is a law graduate from São Paulo, Brazil. For the past 3 years, João has dedicated himself to filmmaking, being the director and producer of 2 short films, Heterotopia and Stage, both screened and awarded in a number of festivals in Brazil and other countries. As an NSSR student, João focuses his research in the areas of gender, sexuality, media, and memory. His talk today is entitled Beyond the Frame, Speculative Queer History on Screen.
Looking into the past through institutional archives has been the standard practice among researchers trying to recover and uncover events that took place in the past. But there is naivety and maybe an intention to forget in taking for granted the parts of the conversation that have not been recorded, hidden, or intentionally altered. Other paths to go beyond the traditional archives, such as speculative history, have been getting more spotlight and proving their worth lately. In contemplating the significance of historical speculation, it becomes evident that within queer cultural production, it can serve as a vital conduit for exploration and reclamation. This thesis delves into speculative narratives and the uses of theorists of queer cultural production and the producers thereof, such as filmmakers and writers, in order to lay groundwork for film analysis. It explores historicism, memory, and fiction narrative. Within this theoretical framework, concepts of queer temporalities, or how queer people experience time, and nostalgia are crucial as they shape how queer communities perceive and engage the past. In order to see how these concepts take place in actual cultural products, I have chosen 4 different audiovisual projects to parallel with my research. Dressed in Blue fictionalizes and takes a step further into the future of a group of trans women who were interviewed by a documentary in the 80s. The First Fallen reimagines the AIDS crisis in Brazil through friendship bonds and self-documentation. Great Freedom glimpses into a forgotten side of the Nazi regime and the struggle that men who had sex with men faced beyond the Second World War. And Framing Agnes re-examines the UCLA-led studies with trans people in the mid-20th century through a mixture of documentary and acting. This thesis explores how speculative histories can be an important tool for queer communities to engage in belonging and hoping for a future by having a past recorded for them. Thank you.
Our final master's presenter of the evening is Lauren Hanley of Economics, studying global political economy and finance. She's worked with human rights organizations, conducting research, and community-based organizations, helping them to scale up their capacity to implement projects. Her academic work focuses on issues of development, community-led initiatives, and the interplay of social movements and economic change. Her presentation today is entitled Ethiopian Self-Help Groups and Collective Risk Management, the Process of Commoning and a New Interpretation of the Social Solidarity Economy.
Microfinance is the practice of lending small chunks of money to people who otherwise do not have access to formal banking services. In my thesis, I provide a brief overview of microfinance models and how they went from being the golden child of development to a business enterprise on the brink of collapse. Through data collected during my fieldwork in Ethiopia over the summer of 2023, I provide an argument for an alternative model of microfinance which is based in a solidarity economy rather than market-based lending practices. Originally, microfinance was marketed to the poorest of the poor. It was heralded as the silver bullet of poverty eradication, and after becoming one of the most popularized development enterprises of the 90s and early 2000s, microfinance suffered a series of collapse and crises of repayment. From this, there was a series of reforms and calls for development. However, microfinance had turned already into a business which profited at the cost of its borrowers. This put tremendous pressure on the subjects of microfinance interventions, who are primarily women in the global south, to repay and provide a return on investment. This left me wondering, is there any hope for microfinance? My fieldwork in Ethiopia revealed to me that there actually are microfinance organizations which have successfully broken away from this profit-based lending model. The organization that I worked with, COSAP, was donor-led rather than investor-led, and they prioritized group autonomy. This meant that groups maintained complete control over their capital, and they set the terms and conditions of their loans. In fact, these groups proved to be about much more than just loans. Called self-help groups, these micro-enterprise collectives were commonly called sisterhoods. The women referred to each other as their self-help group sisters. In fact, during our interviews, the idea of emotional support came up over and over again, and the sisterhood is what got these women through challenging times such as Ethiopia's civil war, the pandemic, and recently hyperinflation. In our mixed methods survey, we saw that social, psychological, and financial outputs are all interrelated. We saw that the women experienced an increase in average household assets, income, and savings, but also an increased knowledge of their own human rights, increased knowledge of their human rights, and decision-making power within the household. Additionally, these women displayed increased hope for being able to lift their families out of poverty. I argue that the interrelated nature of these social, psychological, and financial outputs helps to explain the success of these groups in light of the crisis faced by microfinance on a global scale. As one group member, you can see her here with her prized milking cow, powerfully put it, we are no longer just housewives. Now we are outside of our box, challenging our community and providing an example for others. Thank you.
And that concludes the master's portion of our presentations. Let's give them another. Now we'll begin the PhD portion. First up is Sarah Simon of Clinical Psychology. Sarah aims, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut that off. I'll give you Sarah aims to build both her clinical and research skills and note where the two connect to larger social issues. She applies a critical lens to all her work, employing tools from cognitive science to radical imagination. Her research seeks to address a fundamental question: how much happens because it must, and how much because we believe it must? Sarah's presentation today is entitled Fear of Happiness Predicts Devaluation of Positive Climate Information in Climate-Concerned Individuals.
How much happens because it must, and how much because we say it must? The climate crisis may be on all of our minds. Some of us may be fretting over our plastic use. Others wondering how long we'll have water. Some may be wondering whether to have children. And some just may be throwing in the towel, resigning all hope, and YOLOing it up in the time we have left, right? If you're like me, all of these thoughts have crossed your mind. But the science is clear. We have real issues, yes, but also real solutions. Should we really resign ourselves to letting it burn? my thesis looks at how our individual biases, cultivated from experience, may be coloring our expectations for and literally painting the future of climate change. One framework of use here, I think, is rewards evaluation theory. It describes the process where a reward, something that's positive, when it's paired with threat over time, it's almost as if the reward becomes the threat. For example, let's say you're a climate activist. You're pushing for a policy, it doesn't go through, and then it does, and you're skeptical. It's devalued in some way. And don't get me wrong, it's important to add an ounce or a healthy dose of skepticism to whatever information we're taking in, but sometimes it can override the positive, and that can create a self-fulfilling prophecy. So to test this, we basically recruited people from climate action-oriented websites, and we asked them to imagine that they had just created a climate solution that they were proud of. Then we gave them 2 rounds of feedback, one neutrally worded and the other overtly positively worded. Finally, we gave them something called the fear of happiness scale, which basically measures degree of reward evaluation. What we found in these climate activists was that when they had higher fear of happiness, they rated the positive feedback as less positive, less hope-inducing, and less good feeling. And these are climate activists. Positive information is precisely what they're fighting for, right? But maybe we already know this story. Sometimes you're fighting so long you forget what you're fighting for. But in being accountable to the nightmare that is climate change, can we also be accountable to the dream? So, what kind of psychology holds both this hope and skepticism? Pushes for solutions that matter even in the face of repeated threat. And I ask you, as fellow humans alive during this tumultuous time, if you had to be accountable to your hope, what kind of world would you hope for? Thank you.
Next up is Clover Rashad of the Politics Department. Her research seeks to broaden our understanding of the relationship between politics and resentment. Clover's presentation tonight is entitled The Unhappy Poor, the Politics of Resentment.
In recent years, the term resentment tends to conjure up the image of the angry white man. Here in the US, the left-behind Trump supporter. Political theorists have used this concept to condemn the radical right as dangerous, deplorable, and all too easily manipulated by their leaders. In fact, most contemporary research pathologizes resentment and the resentful in a similar way. But there's a hidden history behind this concept that supports a very different understanding. Resentment has been used to dismiss the masses as reactionary wherever they've appeared in the political scene, even when they've expressed democratic, socialist, and decolonial grievances. My research seeks to move beyond the too easy association of this emotion with the radical right and reconsiders the relationship between resentment and politics more broadly. It finds that resentment is crucial to understanding how the masses were politicized in 3 periods of social struggle: ancient Greece, early capitalist Europe, and 20th century decolonization. In each period, resentment prompted the masses to identify and transform the causes of their grievances. The emotion was considered a driving force behind radically egalitarian forms of politics, even by the concept's most well-known interlocutor, Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche's resentment was an emotion felt by the weak, who bitterly and mistakenly, in his view, blamed the strong for their miserable lot in life. Nietzsche had a particularly strong contempt for socialist agitators, who he thought undermined the working man's innate contentment and taught the masses how to feel how to feel resentful of their superiors. The masses' resentment threw a wrench into the wheel of hierarchical society, and this is what made it such a dangerous emotion to Nietzsche. Turning Nietzsche's genealogical method against Nietzsche himself, my project exposes the power struggles of the past behind our contemporary meaning of resentment. The concept continues to convey a deep distaste for the masses. It scapegoats the so-called irrational populist for the failings of liberal democracy, while obscuring structural problems that we need to be contending with. Now, none of this is to say that Trump supporters are not resentful, far from it, But this emotion alone cannot be blamed for the content of their grievances. As this history of political thought shows, resentment also holds a potential to disrupt hierarchy. Most importantly, if we can change the way that we usually think about this emotion, we can harness that potential in service of emancipatory politics. So, if you consider yourself to be on the left, if you're concerned with building collective action, perhaps you should be a little bit more resentful yourself. After all, you have every right to be.
Our final presenter of the evening is Elizabeth Dijkstra from philosophy. Before arriving to NSSR, Elizabeth studied neuroscience, philosophy, and religion studies at the University of Amsterdam. Her research focuses on the nature and limits of subjectivity, agency, and human cognition in the context of moral experience, judgment, and recognition. Specifically, she's interested in how artificial forms of cognition challenge our understanding of what it means to be moral. Her presentation today is entitled Moral Machines.
Right, let's begin. In the spring of 2022, Blake Lemoine, a Google engineer who we see here in the picture, made headlines when he stated that Google's AI technology had become alive. A few months later, we were all confronted with the application ChatGPT, and although very few of us probably would follow Lemoine in saying that this technology is alive or even conscious, I do think it shows that these technologies are increasingly able to match or surpass the so-called Turing test, meaning that it's becoming increasingly difficult, if not impossible, to distinguish their outputs from that of human agents. That's an issue, and that's an issue because for at least a few hundred, if not thousands of years, we have used the ability to use language properly as an indicator of rationality, and with that, as an indicator of political and ethical agency. And we all do this. Just think about cases and situations in which you ascribe different forms of agency to non or not yet speaking entities, for example, children or pets, compared to adults who are able to speak fully. And with that, we assign different levels of responsibility to them. Now, the question is, how do speaking machines fit into this picture? And philosophy, you could say, generally has like two approaches to this. First, the classic approach takes this model as its starting point and investigates the phenomenon of rationality specifically. Some people in this area say that AI research is basically an empirical addition to philosophy and can ultimately show us how the mind really works. Others in this area say, no, rationality is something that cannot be captured by scientific research, and so AI is just a tool. But both kind of adhere to this position. A second, more radical approach, I would say, is the post-humanist approach, who rejects this framework entirely as outdated and oppressive, and says, instead of looking for ways to separate humans from machines, we should look into new conceptual frameworks that describe our relationship with them. Now, I want to propose a third alternative because I want to adhere to some of the ethical conceptions that are in this framework, but instead I say we should start from the bottom, namely take a look at the notion of responsibility and what that means. Specifically, I say that Lemoine's confusion expresses two ideas about responsibility. One, that it is something that individuals have. Two, that it is something social and that it's something that we express or recognize in each other when we talk to each other. Instead of this confusion, I propose in my dissertation an embodied account of responsibility. And through that, I think we can do justice to both the individual as well as the intersubjective or social component of responsibility without falling into the pitfall that Lemoine saw himself fall in. Thank you.
All right, and if we could have one more round of applause for all of us. I'd like to send another thank you to our judges. Our staff and volunteers who helped put on your show. To the 3-Minute Thesis committee members and organizers, Sherry Cohen, Jennifer McDonald, and Ryan Gustafson. Okay, now here's where it gets complicated. I'm just kidding. There should be one piece of paper beneath your seat. And if you don't, please give Sherry a wave if you don't have one. There are also pens in that basket. We don't have enough for everyone, so if you wouldn't mind sharing with your neighbor.
Okay, everyone. I have some very exciting news I think you've all been waiting for. Can we get one more round of applause to all of the amazing people that presented here tonight? It was a very hard decision we had to make back there, hence why we took so long. But I'm very happy to be sharing with you some of the winners. So for our first runner-up of the 3-Minute Thesis Challenge, we have no other than Patrick Cleary from the I will announce our first place MA student winner here for the 3-Minute Thesis. We have Lauren Hanley. For our first place winner in the PhD department, we have Clover Politics. And last but not least, all of you were asked to do something so wonderful tonight and voice your opinion. We have the audience choice vote. So for our winner for audience choice, we have no other than Minsu Yu from Anthropology. We wish we had more money to give out to all the students and to the panel ourselves, but congratulations to all of the winners here and the contestants tonight. Thank you for everyone for coming out.